In the heart of a world where empires clashed and destinies were forged, one woman rose to defy the odds. Cleopatra VII, the last queen of Egypt, was no ordinary ruler. At just 18, she stepped onto a throne teetering on the edge of collapse, surrounded by betrayal, ambition, and the looming shadow of Rome's greatest power the world had ever known. Her story is not just one of survival, but of brilliance, cunning, and a legacy that continues to captivate us 2,000 years later. Was she a political genius who outmaneuvered the mightiest men of her time? A diplomat who wielded charm and intellect to keep Egypt free? Or merely the seductive enchantress immortalized by Hollywood? Today, on Empires Unfolded, we embark on a 40-minute journey to uncover the truth behind the myth of Cleopatra. Picture Egypt in the 1st century BCE, a land of breathtaking wealth, where the Nile's bounty fueled a civilization that dazzled the ancient world. Yet, beneath its golden surface, the Ptolemaic dynasty was crumbling. Descended from Ptolemy I, a Greek general of Alexander the Great, this family had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries. By the time Cleopatra was born around 69 BCE, the kingdom was a shadow of its former glory, riddled with infighting and squeezed by Rome's expanding grip. As the daughter of Ptolemy XII, Cleopatra was raised not as a mere princess, but as a scholar and strategist. Fluent in 9 languages, including the native Egyptian tongue her predecessors rarely bothered to learn, she was uniquely equipped to bridge the divide between her Greek heritage and the people she ruled. But the path to power was treacherous. At 18, Cleopatra ascended the throne alongside her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, in a marriage dictated by tradition. This was no partnership of equals. Manipulated by ruthless advisors, Ptolemy XIII sought to oust his sister, forcing Cleopatra to flee Alexandria and muster an army in exile. It was a moment that could have ended her story, yet it was only the beginning. With Rome's legions casting their shadow over Egypt, Cleopatra knew her kingdom's fate hung in the balance. Her next move would not only secure her crown but also entwine her destiny with the most powerful men of the age, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. In this video, we'll trace Cleopatra's extraordinary life from her daring rise to power to her tragic fall. We'll explore her alliances with Rome, her lavish court in Alexandria, and the strategies that kept Egypt standing against impossible odds. More than that, we'll question the myths that have defined her. Is the Cleopatra of history the same as the one we see in films and paintings? Join us as we peel back the layers of a queen who was far more than a seductress, a woman who shaped an era. Welcome to Empires Unfolded. Let's dive into the world of Cleopatra. To understand Cleopatra, we must first step into the world that shaped her, a world of opulence, treachery, and unrelenting ambition. In the 1st century BCE, Egypt was a land of contrasts. The Nile River, the lifeblood of the kingdom, nourished fields that produced unimaginable wealth, making Egypt the breadbasket of the Mediterranean. Alexandria, its glittering capital, was a beacon of culture and intellect, home to the legendary library and the towering lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Yet, beneath this grandeur, the Ptolemaic dynasty was rotting from within. The family that had ruled Egypt since the death of Alexander the Great was now a nest of vipers, consumed by rivalries and weakened by centuries of inbreeding. It was into this volatile world that Cleopatra VII was born around 69 BCE, a princess destined to become a queen and a legend. Cleopatra was the daughter of Ptolemy XII, a king whose reign was marked by instability and dependence on Rome. Known as Oletes, or the flute player, Ptolemy XII was more interested in luxury than governance, and his rule was plagued by uprisings and financial ruin. To secure his throne, he borrowed heavily from Roman bankers, effectively mortgaging Egypt's future. Cleopatra, likely one of 6 siblings, grew up in the lavish but perilous court of Alexandria, where loyalty was scarce and danger lurked behind every smile. Her mother, possibly Cleopatra VII, or a high-born Egyptian priestess, remains a shadowy figure, but her influence on the young princess was profound. From an early age, Cleopatra was groomed not as a decorative figurehead, but as a ruler with the tools to command an empire. What set Cleopatra apart was her education. Unlike many women of her team or even her own dynasty, she was trained in the arts of leadership. She studied mathematics, philosophy, and rhetoric, mastering the skills of persuasion that would later define her. Most remarkably, she became fluent in 9 languages, including Greek, Latin, and, crucially, the native Egyptian tongue. This was no small feat. The Ptolemies, proud of their Greek heritage, had ruled Egypt as foreigners, rarely bothering to learn the language of their subjects. Cleopatra's fluency in Egyptian allowed her to connect with her people in a way her ancestors never had, presenting herself as a living embodiment of Isis, the goddess revered by Egyptians. This cultural bridge would prove to be one of her greatest political assets. By the time Cleopatra was a teenager, the Ptolemaic court was a battleground. Ptolemy XII's reliance on Rome alienated his subjects, and in 58 BCE, he was driven into exile by a revolt in Alexandria. Cleopatra, then about 11, likely accompanied her father to Rome, where she witnessed firsthand the might of the Roman Republic and the fragility of her own kingdom. Ptolemy XII's return to power in 55 BCE, backed by Roman legions, came at a steep cost. Egypt was now deeply indebted to Rome, and Cleopatra learned a harsh lesson about the price of survival in a world dominated by a foreign power. When Ptolemy XII died in 51 BCE, Cleopatra, at 18, ascended the throne alongside her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, who was only 10. According to Ptolemaic tradition, the siblings were married, a symbolic union meant to stabilize the dynasty. But this was no partnership. Ptolemy XIII, though young, was surrounded by a cabal of ambitious advisors. Chief among them the eunuch Pothinus and the general Achilles, who saw Cleopatra as a threat. Intelligent, assertive, and unwilling to be a figurehead, Cleopatra quickly asserted her dominance. She issued decrees in her own name, placed her image on coins, and styled herself as the sole ruler. This boldness infuriated Ptolemy XIII's faction, who feared losing control of the boy king. The tension soon erupted into open conflict. By 49 BCE, Cleopatra's enemies accused her of overstepping her authority, and she was forced to flee Alexandria to avoid assassination. She sought refuge in Syria, where she began to gather an army of mercenaries and loyalists. This was a defining moment. Many rulers in her position might have surrendered or faded into exile, but Cleopatra was different. She was not content to lose her birthright. With Rome distracted by its own civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey, Cleopatra saw an opportunity. She needed a powerful ally to tip the scales in her favor, and fate was about to deliver one. The struggle for the throne was not just a family feud. It was a battle for Egypt's survival. The kingdom was caught in a vice. Rome's growing influence threatened its independence, while internal divisions weakened its defenses. Cleopatra's early reign was marked by challenges beyond her brother's rebellion. A series of poor Nile floods had triggered famine, and economic instability fueled unrest among the Egyptian people. Yet, even in these dire circumstances, Cleopatra displayed remarkable resilience. She leveraged her knowledge of Egyptian religion and culture, presenting herself as a protector of Ma'at, divine order, while quietly building alliances with local elites and priests. Her exile in Syria was not a retreat but a regrouping. Cleopatra's charisma and determination attracted followers, and she began to plan her return. Meanwhile, in Alexandria, Ptolemy XIII's advisors overplayed their hand. Their brutal execution of Pompey, who had sought refuge in Egypt after his defeat by Caesar, alienated Julius Caesar when he arrived in Alexandria in 48 BCE. Caesar, now the most powerful man in Rome, was not just a general, but a politician with an eye for opportunity. Cleopatra saw her chance. She needed to reach him before her brother's faction could solidify their hold on Egypt. The stage was set for one of the most famous encounters in history. Cleopatra's next move, whether smuggled into Caesar's presence in a carpet or arriving with calculated flair, would change the course of her life and the fate of Egypt. But that moment, dramatic as it was built on the foundation of her early years, a childhood steeped in learning, a youth forged in crisis, and a resolve to reclaim her throne at any cost. Cleopatra was no mere queen. She was a survivor, a strategist, and a woman ready to challenge the greatest empire of her time. Her fight for the throne was just the beginning of a story that would echo through the ages. Having clawed her way back from exile, Cleopatra stood at a pivotal moment. Her brother Ptolemy XIII and his scheming advisors held Alexandria, but the arrival of Julius Caesar in 48 BCE offered a new battlefield known not of swords but of strategy and charisma. The young queen, barely 21, was about to step onto the world stage, forging a partnership that would not only secure her throne, but also reshape the fate of Egypt. This next chapter of her life, her alliance with Julius Caesar, reveals a woman who wielded intellect and audacity to bend history to her will. In the autumn of 48 BCE, Alexandria was a city on edge. Julius Caesar, fresh from his victory over Pompey in the Roman Civil War, arrived in Egypt pursuing his rival, only to find Pompey already murdered by Ptolemy XIII's advisors in a clumsy attempt to curry favor. Caesar, a man of immense ambition and sharper political instincts, was unimpressed. The act reeked of desperation, and he saw an opportunity to assert Rome's dominance over Egypt's fractured court. For Cleopatra, exiled but never defeated, this was the moment she had been waiting for. To reclaim her throne, she needed Caesar's support, and she knew that reaching him would require a gambit as bold as it was risky. The story of Cleopatra's first meeting with Caesar is the stuff of legend. Ancient sources, like the historian Plutarch, claim she had herself smuggled into Caesar's quarters in Alexandria, hidden inside a rolled-up carpet or a linen sack. Whether this tale is true or embellished, it captures the essence of Cleopatra's daring. She was not content to send emissaries or plead from afar. She chose to confront Caesar face to face, relying on her wit and presence to sway him. Picture the scene: a 21-year-old queen, slipping past Ptolemy's guards under the cover of night, unfurling herself before a battle-hardened general twice her age. It was a calculated risk, blending theatricality with raw courage. Caesar, at 52, was no stranger to power or charm, yet Cleopatra captivated him. She was not the seductress of later myths, but a multilingual scholar with a commanding presence, able to match Caesar's intellect and speak to him in his own language, Latin. She framed her case with precision. Ptolemy XIII and his advisors were unstable, their murder of Pompey proof of their recklessness. She, Cleopatra, offered loyalty, stability, and access to Egypt's vast wealth, which Rome desperately needed to fund its wars. But her appeal was not merely pragmatic. Caesar, a man drawn to bold personalities, saw in Cleopatra a kindred spirit, a ruler, willing to gamble everything for power. Their alliance was sealed not just by politics but by a personal bond. Cleopatra and Caesar became lovers, a relationship that scandalized Alexandria and later Rome. This was no mere fling. It was a strategic partnership with stakes higher than either could have imagined. With Caesar's legions at her side, Cleopatra launched her bid to reclaim the throne. In the winter of 48 BCE, the Alexandrian War erupted, a brutal conflict pitting Caesar and Cleopatra's forces against Ptolemy XIII's army. The fighting was fierce, with Alexandria's streets and harbors descending into chaos. At one point, fires sparked during the siege damaged parts of the Great Library, a loss that still echoes in history. By 47 BCE, Caesar's military prowess and Cleopatra's local support turned the tide. Ptolemy XIII, betrayed by his own advisors and overwhelmed, fled Alexandria and drowned in the Nile while attempting to escape. Cleopatra was restored as queen, now ruling alongside another brother, Ptolemy XIV, a mere figurehead under her control. At 22, she had outmaneuvered her enemies and secured her crown, but her alliance with Caesar came with a new challenge. Egypt was now tethered to Rome's ambitions. Cleopatra's relationship with Caesar deepened during his stay in Egypt. In a bold display of unity, they embarked on a lavish cruise along the Nile, showcasing Egypt's wealth and Cleopatra's divine status as a living goddess. This was more than pageantry. It was a statement to her people and to Rome that Cleopatra was no ordinary client, king. She bore Caesar a son, Caesarion, in 47 BCE, proclaiming him the heir to both Egypt and, implicitly, Caesar's legacy. This move was audacious. Caesar, already married in Rome, could not legally acknowledge a foreign-born son, but Cleopatra's naming of Caesarion sent a clear message. She was building a dynasty with ties to Rome's most powerful man. In 46 BCE, Cleopatra took an even bolder step, traveling to Rome at Caesar's invitation. Accompanied by Caesarion and Ptolemy XIV, she resided in Caesar's villa across the Tiber, a guest but also a queen on display. Her presence caused a sensation. Roman senators, already wary of Caesar's growing power, were scandalized by this foreign queen with her exotic entourage and unabashed confidence. Cleopatra, dressed in the style of Isis, mingled with Rome's elite, reinforcing her image as a divine ruler. Yet, she was also studying Rome's politics, its factions, and its vulnerabilities. She understood that Egypt's independence depended on navigating the treacherous waters of Roman ambition. But the tides of fate were shifting. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, Caesar was assassinated in the Senate, stabbed by those who feared he aimed to be king. His death sent shockwaves through Rome and left Cleopatra in a precarious position. Without Caesar's protection, she and Caesarion were vulnerable in a city now spiraling into chaos. Sensing the danger, Cleopatra fled Rome, returning to Alexandria with her son and her puppet co-ruler, Ptolemy XIV. Soon after, Ptolemy XIV died, under mysterious circumstances. Many suspect at Cleopatra's command, as she sought to eliminate any rival to Caesarion's claim. Cleopatra's time with Caesar had transformed her. She had secured her throne, borne a son with the potential to unite Egypt and Rome, and witnessed the inner workings of the world's greatest empire. Yet, Caesar's death marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Rome was now divided, with new players, Mark Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus vying for control. Cleopatra, once again, would need to choose her ally carefully. Her alliance with Caesar had shown her the power of blending personal charisma with political strategy, a lesson she would carry into her next, even more fateful partnership. With Caesar gone, Cleopatra returned to a kingdom still under her control but increasingly at the mercy of Rome's chaos. Her next move would take her into the orbit of another Roman titan, Mark Antony, in a partnership that would elevate her to the height of power and lead to her ultimate downfall. The stage was set for a new act in the drama of Cleopatra's life. In 44 BCE, Rome was a cauldron of ambition. Julius Caesar's assassination had left a power vacuum, and three men emerged to fill it: Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir; Lepidus, a wealthy ally; and Mark Antony, a battle-hardened general with a flair for the dramatic. Antony, at 39, was a man of contradictions, brilliant on the battlefield, indulgent in his pleasures, and fiercely loyal to those he trusted. He controlled Rome's eastern territories, including the resources Cleopatra needed to keep Egypt strong. For Cleopatra, Antony was not just a potential ally, but a partner who could match her ambition and audacity. Their first meeting, in 41 BCE, is one of history's great spectacles. Antony summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus, in modern-day Turkey, to answer for her alleged support of Caesar's enemies. Rather than arrive as a supplicant, Cleopatra staged a performance that left Antony speechless. She sailed up the Cydnus River on a golden barge, its purple sails billowing, silver oars dipping in rhythm to music. Dressed as Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love, she reclined under a gilded canopy, surrounded by attendants fanning her with peacock feathers. The people of Tarsus flocked to the riverbank, and Antony, invited aboard, was captivated. This was no mere display of wealth. It was a masterclass in diplomacy, showcasing Cleopatra's ability to wield spectacle as a weapon. Cleopatra's charm was undeniable, but her alliance with Antony was rooted in mutual need. Antony required Egypt's grain, gold, and ships to challenge Octavian's growing power in Rome. Cleopatra needed Antony's legions to protect Egypt from Rome's encroaching grasp and to restore territories lost by her ancestors. Their partnership was sealed with a personal bond. Cleopatra and Antony became lovers, and their relationship would produce 3 children, twins Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene in 40 BCE, and Ptolemy Philadelphus in 36 BCE. But this was no mere romance. It was a political alliance that reshaped the eastern Mediterranean. Cleopatra's court in Alexandria became the heart of their shared vision. The city was a marvel, its streets lined with marble palaces, its harbor bustling with trade from as far as India. The Library of Alexandria and its Mausoleum drew scholars from across the world, and Cleopatra, a patron of learning, fostered an environment where art, science, and philosophy thrived. Her court was also a stage for extravagance. She and Antony hosted lavish banquets, where they played roles in a society they called the inimitable livers, dedicated to living life to the fullest. One story tells of Cleopatra dissolving a priceless pearl in vinegar and drinking it to prove her wealth, a tale likely exaggerated but emblematic of her flair for the dramatic. Politically, Cleopatra's influence over Antony was profound. In 37 BCE, during the donations of Alexandria, Antony granted Cleopatra vast territories, including Cyprus, parts of Syria, and the coast of Lebanon. These lands restored much of the Ptolemaic Empire's former glory, making Cleopatra one of the most powerful rulers in the region. In a grand ceremony, she was proclaimed Queen of Kings, with her children Caesarion, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus named as rulers of various territories. This bold move was a direct challenge to Rome, particularly to Octavian, who saw Antony's actions as a betrayal of Roman interests. To Octavian, Cleopatra was not just a foreign queen but a threat to Rome's unity, a narrative he would exploit to devastating effect. Cleopatra's partnership with Antony was not without flaws. Antony's military campaigns, particularly his disastrous invasion of Parthia in 36 BCE, drained resources and weakened his standing in Rome. Cleopatra supported him with ships and funds, but the losses emboldened Octavian, who began a propaganda campaign painting Cleopatra as a seductress, leading Antony astray. In Rome, stories circulated of Antony abandoning Roman values for an Eastern queen, living in decadent luxury, while Octavian portrayed himself as the defender of tradition. Cleopatra, aware of her vilification, doubled down on her image as a divine ruler, aligning herself with Isis to solidify her authority in Egypt. By 32 BCE, the alliance faced its greatest test. Octavian declared war not on Antony, but on Cleopatra, framing her as the enemy of Rome. This was a masterstroke, rallying Roman support against a foreign queen rather than a fellow Roman. Antony and Cleopatra prepared for war, amassing a fleet and army in Greece. Their plan hinged on naval superiority, with Cleopatra's ships forming a critical part of their forces, but cracks were showing. Antony's Roman allies began defecting to Octavian, and Cleopatra's presence in the war camp insisting on a commanding role alienated some of Antony's supporters, who resented a woman wielding such influence. The stage was set for the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, a naval clash that would decide the fate of the Mediterranean. Cleopatra and Antony's fleet faced Octavian's, led by the cunning general Agrippa. The battle was a catastrophe. Cleopatra, commanding her own ships, withdrew early with her treasure-laden vessels, possibly to preserve Egypt's resources, or because she saw the battle turning against them. Antony followed, abandoning his fleet. The retreat was seen as cowardice by his remaining allies, and their forces crumbled. Actium was not just a military defeat, it was the unraveling of Cleopatra and Antony's dream of a united Eastern Empire. The defeat at Actium in 31 BCE was a wound from which Cleopatra and Mark Antony could not recover. Their grand vision of an Eastern Empire, with Alexandria as its glittering heart, lay in ruins. Octavian, now the unchallenged master of Rome's destiny, turned his sights on Egypt, determined to erase Cleopatra's power and claim her kingdom for himself. As the noose tightened around Alexandria, Cleopatra faced her darkest hour. Yet, even in the face of inevitable defeat, she remained a queen calculating, defiant, and fiercely protective of her legacy. This chapter, The Fall and Death of Cleopatra, marks the end of an era and the birth of a legend. In the aftermath of Actium, Cleopatra and Antony limped back to Alexandria, their fleet shattered, their allies deserting them. The city that had once dazzled the world with its wealth and splendor now bore the weight of impending doom. Antony, broken by defeat, retreated into bouts of despair and drunkenness, haunted by the loss of his honor and the loyalty of his men. Cleopatra, however, refused to surrender. At 38, she was still the sharp-minded strategist who had outwitted enemies since her youth. She knew Octavian's victory was not yet complete, and she sought every possible path to preserve Egypt's future, whether through negotiation, deception, or a final act of defiance. Cleopatra's first move was to secure her kingdom's resources. She fortified Alexandria, stockpiled grain, and ensured her treasury remained intact, knowing Egypt's wealth could be a bargaining chip. She also sent her eldest son, Caesarion, now 17, to the Red Sea coast with plans to flee to India or Nubia, hoping to protect him from Octavian's wrath. Caesarion, as the proclaimed heir of Julius Caesar, was a direct threat to Octavian's claim as Caesar's adopted son, making his survival critical to Cleopatra's vision of a Ptolemaic legacy. Her other children, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus, remained in Alexandria under her protection, a testament to her determination to safeguard her dynasty. Meanwhile, Cleopatra opened secret negotiations with Octavian, testing his intentions. She offered to abdicate in exchange for her children's safety, a pragmatic move that showed her willingness to sacrifice personal power for her family's future. Octavian, however, was playing a longer game. He responded ambiguously, keeping Cleopatra hopeful while planning to capture her alive. His goal was clear: to parade Cleopatra through Rome in a triumphal procession, a living trophy to cement his dominance. For Cleopatra, such humiliation was unthinkable. She had spent her life crafting an image as a divine queen, a living Isis, and she would not allow Octavian to reduce her to a spectacle. By 30 BCE, Octavian's forces closed in on Alexandria. Antony, rallying for one last stand, led a small army to confront the invaders, but was betrayed by his remaining troops, who defected to Octavian. Devastated, Antony returned to the city, believing Cleopatra had surrendered to Octavian. In a moment of despair, he fell on his sword, only to learn that Cleopatra was still alive, barricaded in her mausoleum, a fortified tomb she had prepared as a final refuge. Carried to her side, Antony died in her arms, a tragic end to a man who had once dreamed of ruling the world beside her. Cleopatra, now alone, mourned her partner, but wasted no time on sentiment. Her focus turned to her final confrontation with Octavian. Cleopatra's mausoleum was both a fortress and a stage for her last act. Stocked with treasures and flammable materials, it was a deliberate signal. She would rather burn her wealth than let it fall into Roman hands. When Octavian's emissaries arrived, demanding her surrender, Cleopatra negotiated from a position of defiance, refusing to leave her sanctuary. Octavian, wary of her resolve, sent a trusted officer, Cornelius Dolabella, to persuade her. But Cleopatra had already made her decision. She would not be Octavian's prisoner. The circumstances of Cleopatra's death on August 12, 30 BCE, are shrouded in myth. The most famous account, recorded by Plutarch, claims she smuggled a venomous asp, perhaps 2, into her mausoleum, hidden in a basket of figs, and allowed it to bite her. The image of a queen calmly embracing death by snakebite, a symbol of divine power in Egyptian culture, has captivated imaginations for centuries. Modern scholars, however, suggest a more practical method, a self-administered poison, possibly a mixture of hemlock or opium, which would have caused a swift and painless death. Whatever the means, Cleopatra's suicide was a final act of agency, denying Octavian his triumph. She was 39 years old. Cleopatra's death marked the end of Egypt's independence. Octavian, now unchallenged, annexed Egypt as a Roman province, its riches fueling his transformation into Augustus, the first Roman emperor. Caesarion, betrayed by his tutors, was captured and executed, erasing the last threat to Octavian's claim as Caesar's heir. Cleopatra's younger children were spared but taken to Rome, where they were raised by Octavian's sister, Octavia, ironically, Antony's former wife. Cleopatra Selene later married King Juba II of Mauritania, carrying her mother's legacy into a new generation, but the Ptolemaic dynasty was no more. In Alexandria, Cleopatra's death sent ripples through the city. Her subjects, who had revered her as a goddess, mourned the loss of their queen and their freedom. Octavian, ever pragmatic, allowed Cleopatra to be buried alongside Antony in a tomb befitting their status, a gesture that acknowledged her stature even in defeat. Yet he wasted no time erasing her political legacy, dismantling Ptolemaic institutions, and reshaping Egypt as a Roman breadbasket. Cleopatra's fall was not just the end of a queen but the closing of an epoch. For nearly 300 years, the Ptolemies had ruled Egypt, blending Greek and Egyptian cultures into a vibrant civilization. Cleopatra, the last of their line, had fought to preserve that world against impossible odds. Her defeat at Octavian's hands was not a failure of courage or intellect, but a testament to the relentless tide of Roman expansion. In her final moments, she chose death over dishonor, ensuring that her story would endure not as a tale of submission, but as one of defiance. With Cleopatra's death in 30 BCE, the curtain fell on the Ptolemaic dynasty and Egypt's independence. Yet, her story did not end in the mausoleum where she took her final breath. Instead, it began a new journey, one that would see her transformed from a historical figure into a myth, a symbol, and a source of fascination for millennia. The legacy of Cleopatra, how she was remembered, reshaped, and debated, reveals as much about the societies that told her story as it does about the queen herself. This final chapter explores her enduring impact, from the biased pens of Roman historians to the dazzling portrayals of modern culture, and asks, who was the real Cleopatra, and why does she still captivate us? Cleopatra's death marked the triumph of Octavian, soon to be Augustus, and the dawn of the Roman Empire. Yet, even in defeat, Cleopatra's presence lingered, a specter that haunted her conqueror. Augustus understood the power of narrative, and he set about shaping Cleopatra's image to serve his own ends. In Rome, she was cast as the ultimate villain, a foreign seductress who had ensnared Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, leading them to betray their Roman virtues. This portrayal was no accident. By demonizing Cleopatra, Augustus justified his war against Antony, deflected blame for Rome's civil strife, and reinforced the narrative of Roman supremacy over the decadent East. His propaganda machine worked tirelessly, ensuring that Cleopatra's name became synonymous with danger and excess. Roman historians, writing decades after her death, cemented this image. Plutarch, in his Life of Antony, described Cleopatra as a woman of irresistible charm, whose voice and intellect could bend men to her will. While he acknowledged her brilliance, his account leaned heavily on her supposed manipulation of Antony, painting her as a femme fatale. Cassius Dio, another Roman chronicler, went further, portraying her as a schemer whose ambition threatened Rome's stability. These accounts, written by men loyal to the empire that conquered Egypt, were not neutral. They reflected Rome's unease with a woman who wielded power as boldly as any man, and their biases shaped Cleopatra's image for centuries. Yet, even in Rome's vilification, glimpses of Cleopatra's true stature shone through. Her fluency in 9 languages, her patronage of Alexandria's intellectual life, and her ability to rule a kingdom under Rome's shadow were undeniable. Egyptian sources, though fewer and less preserved, offer a different perspective. To her subjects, Cleopatra was a protector of Ma'at, divine order, whose alignment with Isis made her a living goddess. She navigated Egypt's economic crises, from Nile floods to Roman demands, with a pragmatism that kept her kingdom afloat. Her decision to learn the Egyptian language, unlike her Ptolemaic ancestors, endeared her to the native population, who saw her as a ruler who bridged their culture with the Greek world of her dynasty. As centuries passed, Cleopatra's story was reshaped by new voices. In the Middle Ages, European chroniclers like Geoffrey Chaucer included her in works like The Legend of Good Women, casting her as a tragic romantic figure rather than a villain. The Renaissance, with its fascination for classical antiquity, saw artists and writers reimagine Cleopatra as a symbol of exotic beauty and doomed love. Paintings from this era often depicted her death, with an asp at her breast, emphasizing her sensuality over her statesmanship. These portrayals, while captivating, stripped away the complexity of a queen who had outmaneuvered Rome's greatest leaders for nearly 2 decades. The modern era brought Cleopatra into sharper focus, but not always with greater accuracy. The 19th century, with its obsession with the Orient, saw her as an emblem of Eastern mystique. Writers like William Shakespeare, in his play Antony and Cleopatra, 1607, crafted a Cleopatra who was both regal and passionate, a queen whose love for Antony was as grand as her ambition. Shakespeare's portrayal, while sympathetic, leaned into the romantic tragedy, overshadowing her political acumen. By the 20th century, Hollywood seized her story, and Cleopatra became a global icon. The 1963 film Cleopatra, starring Elizabeth Taylor, was a cultural phenomenon, its lavish sets and tempestuous love story cementing the queen as a symbol of glamour. Yet Taylor's Cleopatra, with her dramatic eyeliner and sultry demeanor, was more a product of mid-century fantasy than historical truth. These modern retellings, while powerful, often obscured Cleopatra's reality. She was not a one-dimensional seductress, nor merely a tragic lover. She was a polyglot who spoke to her people in their language, a diplomat who negotiated with Rome's titans, and a mother who fought to secure her children's future. Her court in Alexandria was a hub of innovation, where scholars and artists thrived under her patronage. Her economic policies, including trade with India and the Red Sea, kept Egypt prosperous despite Rome's demands. And her strategic alliances with Caesar and Antony were not acts of caprice, but calculated moves to preserve her kingdom's autonomy. Today, historians and archaeologists are peeling back the layers of myth to rediscover the real Cleopatra. Recent studies emphasize her role as a Hellenistic ruler, blending Greek and Egyptian traditions to create a unique identity. Excavations in Alexandria, though challenging due to modern urban sprawl, have uncovered artifacts from her era, offering glimpses of the city she ruled. Scholars also highlight her resilience. For 19 years, she kept Egypt independent in an age when smaller kingdoms were swallowed by Rome. Her death, whether by asp or poison, was not a surrender but a final act of defiance, ensuring she would not be Octavian's trophy. Cleopatra's legacy endures because she defies easy categorization. She was a woman in a man's world, a Greek ruling an Egyptian kingdom, a queen who loved and lost but never bowed. Her story resonates with those who see in her a symbol of resistance, intelligence, or unapologetic ambition. From ancient temples to modern screens, she remains a mirror for our own values and fantasies. Was she a hero, a villain, or something far more complex? Perhaps the truest Cleopatra is the one who eludes us, a queen whose brilliance shines through the distortions of time. Cleopatra's story, spanning her rise, her alliances, her fall, and her immortalization, is more than a historical chronicles, a lens through which we view power, ambition, and the human spirit. As we stand at the close of her saga, we reflect on the woman who defied an empire and left an indelible mark on history. This final chapter weaves together the threads of Cleopatra's life, offering a conclusion that honors her complexity and invites you, the viewer, to join the conversation about her legacy. Welcome to the end of our journey with Empires Unfolded, where we ask, what does Cleopatra's life teach us, and how will her story inspire the future? In the heart of Alexandria, on that fateful day in August 30 BCE, Cleopatra VII took her final breath, and with it, the Ptolemaic dynasty faded into history. Yet her death was not an end, but a beginning, a spark that ignited a legacy spanning 2 millennia. Over the past 40 minutes, we've journeyed through her life, from a young queen fighting for her throne, to a master diplomat forging alliances with Rome's titans, to a mother and ruler who faced her downfall with unyielding resolve. Cleopatra was no mere figurehead. She was a force of nature, a woman who bent the arc of history with her intellect, charisma, and courage. As we close this chapter with Empires Unfolded, let's reflect on what her story means and why it continues to resonate across the ages. Cleopatra's life was a tapestry of triumphs and tragedies, woven from the threads of a world in upheaval. Born into a decaying dynasty, she inherited a kingdom teetering on the edge of collapse, caught between its own internal strife and the relentless expansion of Rome. At just 18, she faced betrayal from her brother Ptolemy XIII and exile from her capital. Yet she emerged stronger, using her education and cunning to reclaim her crown. Her alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were not mere romantic entanglements, but strategic partnerships that kept Egypt independent for nearly 2 decades. Even in defeat at the Battle of Actium and in her final moments, she chose her own path, denying Octavian the victory of parading her through Rome. Cleopatra's story is one of resilience, a testament to what a single individual can achieve against impossible odds. What set Cleopatra apart was her ability to navigate a world dominated by men and empires. She was a polyglot, speaking 9 languages, including Egyptian, which endeared her to her subjects and set her apart from her Greek forebears. She was a scholar, fostering Alexandria's role as a beacon of learning, where the library and Mausian thrived under her patronage. She was a diplomat, wielding charm and intellect to secure Egypt's place in a Roman-dominated world. And she was a mother, fighting to protect her children, Caesarion, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus, against a future that ultimately consumed them. Cleopatra's multifaceted identity challenges the simplistic labels history has often imposed on her: seductress, villain, or tragic heroine. She was all these and more, a queen who defied categorization. Her legacy, however, is as much about how she was remembered as what she achieved. In the hands of Roman propagandists, Cleopatra became a cautionary tale, a foreign temptress who led great men astray. Augustus and his historians crafted this narrative to justify Rome's conquest, but they could not erase her brilliance. Over time, her story evolved. Medieval poets saw her as a romantic ideal, Renaissance artists as a tragic beauty, and modern filmmakers as a glamorous icon. Each era reshaped Cleopatra to reflect its own values, yet the core of her story, her defiance, her intelligence, her humanity remains untouched. Today, scholars and storytellers are rediscovering the real Cleopatra, peeling back layers of myth to reveal a ruler whose achievements rival those of any king. Why does Cleopatra still captivate us? Perhaps it's because she embodies the eternal struggle for agency in a world that seeks to constrain it. As a woman in a patriarchal age, she wielded power with a boldness that shocked her contemporaries and inspired generations. As a Greek ruling an Egyptian kingdom, she bridged cultures, creating a legacy that resonates in our own diverse world. As a queen who loved and lost, she reminds us of the human cost of ambition. Cleopatra's story is universal because it speaks to anyone who has ever fought for their place, dared to dream beyond their circumstances, or faced defeat with dignity. But her story also raises questions that linger. Was she a visionary who preserved Egypt's independence against all odds, or a pragmatist who played a losing hand with unmatched skill? Did her alliances with Caesar and Antony reflect love, strategy, or both? And how do we reconcile the Cleopatra of history with the icon of popular culture? These questions are not just academic, they invite us to examine our own biases, to question the stories we inherit, and to seek the truth beneath the surface. Cleopatra's life challenges us to look beyond the myths and see the woman who shaped an era. As we conclude this journey with Empires Unfolded, we turn the story over to you. What does Cleopatra mean to you? Is she a hero, a strategist, or an enigma who defies definition? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know which figure from history you'd like us to explore next. Perhaps the rise of Augustus, who built an empire on Cleopatra's defeat, or the story of Cleopatra Selene, who carried her mother's legacy to a new kingdom. The past is alive with stories waiting to be told, and we're honored to share them with you. Thank you for joining us on this 30-minute odyssey through the life of Cleopatra. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to Empires Unfolded, and ring the bell to stay updated on our latest historical adventures. Share this video with friends who love history, and let's keep the conversation going. Cleopatra's story reminds us that history is not just about dates and battles, it's about people, their dreams, and the legacies they leave behind. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep unfolding the empires of the past. Farewell from Empires Unfolded, and we'll see you in the next chapter of history.